Recording. Hey everybody, welcome to one sec here. Oh, yeah, it's all that weightlifting I do. Pull-ups, very effective. How are ya? Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, the after the show. And tonight we had an opportunity to review some of the statements that the left has been making about our current fiscal situation, and saying, I mean, we had a quote from Senator Harkin saying that we really don't have a debt problem, that we're not broke. 46 cents of every dollar we're borrowing, I don't know what you'd call it, but here around the kitchen table, that would be broke. But of course, there's a disconnect between the left and the rest of us, it seems. And I would say that would go in particular to those in office who just don't understand that when they talk about budgeting, they always talk about that. Sitting around the kitchen table. Well, how do you borrow 46 cents of every dollar? Oh, yeah, that's right. You can print the money. And then we have to borrow more from others. And that just keeps going. And wow, if you can set your own credit limit and you keep going. All that said, tonight, the president, which we did talk about, the State of the Union, some of the things that he's looking to do, and we will have a response right here on Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly broadcasts from 5 to 6:30 Central, 6 to 7:30 Eastern, right here on AFR Talk. Now, here is the one that gets me. It is talking about how they're going to grow the economy. And he's saying, how do we attract more jobs to our shores? How do we equip people with the skills needed to do those jobs? You get out of the way and you stop spending dough. And you start recognizing that when you spend money, you haven't produced that wealth. And so you think that's growing the economy with, quote, investments, when all you're doing is taking from the pool a bucket and going to the deep end. Taking that water from the deep end, pouring it back into the shallow end. And then, of course, we can factor in the sun, which lowers it all through evaporation at some point because it is so inefficient. All right, so that's just the reality. Investments. When they talk about investments, another talk about controls. We look at education spending, 400% increase since 1983, and well above the rate of inflation. Check that out, by the way. Neil Mikulski's done some great work at the Cato Institute if you're curious about where my numbers are coming from, and I'm not grabbing them out of thin air. You see, I can't do that. The CBO director talked about the fact that he hasn't gotten a clear proposal, a specific proposal when it comes to a plan dealing with sequestration. The president's overplayed here, okay? I guess this will be kind of a preview of the State of the Union. He's overplayed it. He believes he's convinced Americans that his agenda works. I think it's a misread of the election. We had a lot of people stay home, less people voting for both candidates and both parties. So if we understand what's happened in the election, and we understand that, well, let's take a signature policy like healthcare, which has cost 87% more than he said it would, and they fudged the numbers with double counting and didn't take into effect what would happen when they thought they could defy the laws of basic economics. $3,000 more each? Yeah, I mean, the premiums are going up. They haven't bent the cost curve. They don't know how. The only way to bend the cost curve is to encourage a more direct relationship between the consumer and the provider and get government out of the way. That way you'll establish a true price. You bring on personal responsibility, because when you get the government involved, what you're going to do is you're going to grow inefficiency and dependency. And what we have now with his healthcare legislation that he said would bring down costs is done the exact opposite of what it said he'd do. But that's what we've seen with the stimulus. He's going to talk about more stimulus and those investments into education. Every time he talks about more investments, remember, that's spending. And that's taking from the productive and the producer, or the producers, however you want to put it, and giving it to government and distributing it to the friends of those politicians. Franklin recognized this and said our republic would be over when the population as well as the politicians realized they could vote pieces of the treasury to a specific group, thereby maintaining their power. The progressive tax code has absolutely contributed to this. That's why I'm such a big fan of Dr. Benjamin Carson, so many reasons. The fact that he is biblically based, first and foremost, but the reason of how the president is able to divide and conquer, how the left is able to divide and conquer. It's because we have people who don't have skin in the game. I don't say that to penalize them. I don't say that to criticize them. I'm criticizing the system. And if you don't pay for something, well, you're not going to worry about its costs. And that's the problem. And we've all done this in the name of fairness, which is subjective. But a truly fair policy wouldn't be to penalize somebody or take more of what they have because they produce more. That's tremendously unfair. You know it, I know. So what we're going to get, here's another quote from the speech excerpt. Tonight I'll lay out additional proposals that are fully paid for and fully consistent with the budget framework of both parties that they agreed to 18 months ago. Let me repeat, nothing I'm proposing tonight should increase the size of our deficit by a single dime. It is not bigger government we need, but smarter government that sets priorities and invests in broad-based economic growth. That is not your responsibility. I'll just go to the last part, broad-based economic growth. To invest in it is not your job to invest in broad-based economic growth. Your job is to do what government was outlined to do within the parameters set by the Constitution. Now, of course, we've taken the General Welfare Clause, and with decisions like the Heberling decision with Social Security, where they did judicial gymnastics to make it, well, I mean, similar to what we saw with the Obamacare decision, tax, not a tax, the whole thing. It's bunny stew. For lack of a better term, it's bunny stew. And when he says he's not going to add to the deficit, not by a single dime, here's the man who came into office with respect. This is not about him personally. This is what he said. And I'm going to measure that, and I'm going to measure what he said versus what he did and where we are. And the reality is he criticized President Bush for a $500 billion deficit and proceeded to go $1 trillion deficit plus each and every year. We've had an annualized decline in economic growth. That's the reality. We have a man who says he's not going to add a single dime to the deficit. He talks about the cuts that have been proposed, and we are not even, the cuts that are being proposed by the opposition party or those on the right who are looking at cuts to discretionary spending as well as to the entitlement programs won't even be at 2008 levels. They're not even talking about bringing it back to 2008 levels. This is a wonderful article today in the Investors Business Daily that outlines this. It's 2008 levels plus 10%. We've seen a 60% growth in some programs and their funding. If you want to really just boil it down and take one example that really illustrates the rest of the problem, they talk about killing children because you are going to cut back on WIC funding, which we look at what WIC does, which is it provides formula for ostensibly children in severe poverty. Half the children in America, half the infants in America are on WIC. Now you're telling me half the children in America are in extreme poverty? It's the last resort. They can't get it without? No. And we have over a quarter of mothers who are on this program. This is what happens. They exaggerate. They don't tell the truth. They did the same thing with Ryan Wyden, which was bipartisan when it came to introducing economic reforms when it came to Medicare, and talked about Granny throwing off the cliff. This is an opportunity for the president to say what he's said before and to say it to the applause line and support. And everybody sits there who made up their mind beforehand to celebrate him, saying, "Great, yeah, wonderful, yeah." And you ask about the record. What is the result? Because we're adults, right? We have to look at the result of the policy. What is the result of the policy? The result of the policy is failure. Now look, when we have economic failure, right here around the kitchen table, where he always talks about the middle class and whatever he considers lower economic to middle class, not the rich, but when we have economic failure, we have to change. We have to change. We can't come back year after year and say, we're going to take more of the money. Because you know what happens? The money dries up. And you have to face that. And you have to pay it back. And it's like getting a big kick in the stomach. And you learn. You learn very quickly. This man is borrowing, this government is borrowing 46%, 46 cents on the dollar. Not 40 cents, 46 cents. It's the latest number. And he is talking about spending more money and not changing fundamentally the entitlement programs, which are 60% of the budget. 18 to 22% of the budget goes to national security. You tell me if you think that's upside down and wrong. You think that's a little bit out of there. We've had a 60% of the budget goes to, in essence, a welfare state. You say, I paid into it, but if we look at Social Security and Medicare combined, you get more in than you pay out, and we have the declining demographically, it cannot continue. It's not demonizing people who have paid in. No, it was never about that. It's math. They always say, it's math. Well, yes, it's math. And that's the reality of it. So when we look at this, at worst, they're Ponzi schemes. At best, they are promises that just can't be kept. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for truth. I'm looking for a plan to truly solve our problems that that has an economic history. You can tell me if you think we've had an economic history that these policies have worked. And if you tell me FDR, you're really not studying history very well at all, because you're wrong. His policies exacerbated the Great Depression, as did Hoover's. And Hoover did similar to what Bush did by embracing policies of government. And protectionism. That's the bottom line. I wish they would read history or understand it. I wish the fact that we would judge not only on our intentions but our results. And I wish we had the guiding principle, first and foremost, to humble ourselves before God. And in that recognition, know that we haven't lost our human nature. And that is something that our founders understood profoundly. All right, so with that, that's the After the Show. Great to be with you. I'll put this on tape. Yeah, tape, Crane? You're going to go back to tape? Yeah. I'm going to get my 8-track too. Put it on that. I'll put it out there. Enjoy, and we will have the response to the State of the Union as well as Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth State of the Union. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm honored. Obviously, we're blessed to have you. Look forward to connecting with you more. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly broadcast on AFR Talk, and live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart, and always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. That's it.